Sarangeo, Oppa, Anyo. I think these are some of the words that all of us unknowingly or unknowingly are familiar with. Yes, it's the K craze. The K world has been the talk of the town and is taking the world by storm. From BTS to Squid Game to high-end beauty standards, South Korea reigns as a global exporter of pop culture and entertainment. The country's pop culture have become a major contributor to its 1.8 trillion economy, making it the fourth largest in Asia and 10th largest in the world. South Korea has become a leading cultural powerhouse in the era of social media and digital culture today. But how does the country go from a war-decimated state just 70 years ago and become a major driver of global soft power? Hi, I'm Rupa Barwa and you're watching The Movie Show. Today, let's understand how South Korea has been driving the world with its growing cultural influence. South Korea's growing cultural influence gave rise to Hallyu, which means the Korean wave, and the word describes the worldwide growing popularity of the Korean culture over the last 2 decades. The phenomenon has been amplified by the tech-savvy and socially conscious global fan bases who are expanding the relevance of Hallyu around the world. Let's go back in time and dig a little deeper. From 1910 to 1945, it was the Japanese Empire who ruled the Korean peninsula. The occupations were brutal. There were mass executions happening, forced labor, and near total repression to the Korean culture. The Koreans were forced to adopt and integrate the Japanese culture into their daily lives. So if you were among the wealthiest and the most educated Koreans, then your life under colonialism, you would have the opportunity to attend Japanese universities, learn the language, and basically get Japanized in every possible way. But there was the other part of the country where the typical Korean would still be living in their villages, completely untouched and unaware of what's happening to the other part of the country. There were still farmers losing their jobs, living in poverty, and there was quite a lot of economic disruption. But it was also the Japanese who continued and contributed to industrialize the peninsula and invested in the latest technologies such as radios and the railroads. Both Japan and Korea were the largest markets of export for Hollywood, so in the 1920s and 30s, the Koreans had the means to watch the latest Hollywood films. So this is how early on Korea got exposed to the global media scale. And when the American soldiers replaced Japanese as occupiers, they brought in their own soft power. Do you know about the Forgotten War? It was a 3-year-long war from 1950 to 1953. The Korean War was often called the Forgotten War because it was largely overshadowed by World War II and Vietnam. The Korean War was one of the first Cold War clashes between the US and the Soviet Union. It was an ideological battle. Communism versus democracy, North versus South. A battle that would formally never end, with two global superpowers backing the opposite sides at the stake of Korean people's expense. Surprisingly, India made a significant contribution during the Korean War. It deployed an army medical unit, the 68th Parachute Field Ambulance, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel A.G. Rangaraj Mahavir Chakra. The unit treated over 222,324 patients, including civilians, during its course of deployment. It was the Indian proposal at the UN General Assembly for the termination of the Korean War, which was finally adopted and resulted in the formulation of the Armistice Agreement, which ended in July 1953. 5 nations were invited to form the Neutral Nations Repatriation Commission, namely Czechoslovakia, Sweden, Poland, Switzerland and India, and all of them collectively named India to lead NNRC. Just when the Koreans thought that finally the war is over and now everybody could go back and build the country's economy together. And that is when an authoritarian dictator walks in. In 1961, a military coup, Park Chung-hee takes power and becomes elected president. He made his name in the military as the lieutenant for the Japanese during World War II and as the general for the Korean army. And once he took power, he ruled with an iron fist. During the era of Park Chung-hee, people had curfews. People were going around measuring the length of your hair. If they were too long, they would cut it. They were going around measuring the length of the skirts as well. But what secretly led to was the development of the night culture. because one couldn't go back home, so they decided to stay out all night. Still, daily life for many Koreans remained harsh. Park Chung-hee's goal was to transform Korea's economy, and to do that, he demanded self-sacrifice. Koreans who imagined themselves all to be of one country, Park Chung-hee was the one who hammered this message through culture and media. He censored content that did not support his vision for Korea, and instead mandated propaganda songs to be played at least twice a day over television and radio, promoting hard work and patriotism. He believed this message of long working hours, harsh working conditions, and low pay were all worth it for the future of a free and independent South Korea. But the citizens who were receiving this message, who had been scarred from war, repression, and division, nothing of this path was optional. There was no choice but to survive and toil on. Park Chung-hee's dictatorship came to an end in 1979 when he was assassinated by the head of the Korean CIA, and fractures within his regime reached a breaking point. Rise of South Korea's de facto leader. Chun Doo-hwan was a South Korean army general and a military dictator who ruled as a strong military man from 1979 to 1980, and as a fifth president of South Korea from 1980 to 1988. President Chun Doo-hwan is famous for launching the 3S policy in South Korea, which is sports, screen, and sex. In this, he wanted to encourage the development of Korean media, culture, and sports league as a kind of diversion. He loosened curfews and relaxed censorship laws that encouraged the production of erotic films and opened doors to many more Korean film production. The Korean broadcasters started getting exported outside of Korea. Koreans made K-dramas into attractive products for other Asian countries by exporting them without sound, which allowed the Chinese and Japanese broadcasters to dub it over. So they were just using the images, but they were adding their own soundtracks to them. And this is how the Korean wave started to swell. And this is how the era of making K-dramas started. Korea was also exporting textiles, steel, and now VCRs, and US became its one of the major trade partners. Koreans were like, we have done it. We are the first world. We are a rich country and a rich nation. But what these people didn't know was that things were slowly changing within the country. President Chun Doo-hwan's 3SS policy, sports, screen, and sex, had its unintended consequences. As Koreans gained more freedom, the call for democracy rose, and in 1987, South Korea had its first democratic election, and it was on the rise. But the promise of globalization also came with a bell, and after the rise came a fall. The year is 1997, and a financial crisis had rocked Asia. All of a sudden, there was no more liquidity in the global markets. In a matter of months, companies went bankrupt, banks shut down, and people started noticing their savings and investment vanishing. Korea turned to International Monetary Fund for help, and that did not sit right with many South Koreans, as most of them felt that their country was being colonized all over again. Even if the International Monetary Fund is an international organization, it is still run by the US. The IMF ultimately granted South Korea a nearly $60 billion bailout, on a day that till date many call it the National Humiliation Day. In some ways, South Korea found itself where it was at the end of the Korean War, feeling beholden but compelled to rise again. And Koreans took it upon themselves to pay the loan back, contributing in whatever way they could. The people of South Korea ran gathering campaigns where everyone brought in their wedding rings, gold, personal possessions, and melted them down for the government. They would also sell their gold in order to build gold bullion necessary to back the loan. Over 3 million Koreans donated 200 plus tons of gold in a show of patriotic unity. South Korea managed to pay off its debts in just 4 years. After the International Monetary Fund crisis, the gap between the wealthy and poor Koreans widened. The rich got richer while others' wealth declined. Youth unemployment rose, and there was a growing sense that no matter how much you tried, you could not make it in South Korea. By the 2000s, this idea of Korean soft power, that Koreans can find a place in the world, not through hard military economic power but through cultural influences, captured the imagination of a lot of Koreans. And the investment in Korean K-drama, movies, music, food began to pay off in South Korea and way beyond it. Gangnam in South Korea has the largest number of plastic surgery clinics, and the place itself was made world famous through Psy's 2012 viral hit song Gangnam Style. Gangnam is like the mecca of high consumption, and Gangnam Style took the world by storm. The music video was the first ever YouTube video that hit a billion views. It was the classic example of K-pop. A catchy chorus, booming bass, absurd outfits in bright colors. It did something that none other Korean pop song had done earlier. It broke the worldwide exclusive music market. The entire song Gangnam Style is kind of a parody of this lifestyle that a lot of Koreans are actually not living in. But this entire image of this high consumption lifestyle that a lot of Koreans want to experience but are unable to experience it. The message behind Gangnam Style resonated with the Korean audience, even though the rest of the world didn't always catch on. For instance, let's look at the film Parasite, where a poor family living in the underbelly of Korean society is determined to claw their way out of poverty. Or let's say Squid Game, where hundreds of strangers are trapped by death, are so desperate that they would literally battle to the death just for a chance to climb out of the hole. The reality that showed in Parasite and Squid Game still persists in the country, and the whole world was captivated by these disturbing stories, and how these two became the center of cultural firestorm to the world. We were looking at something made across the world to understand the fears and problems that plague the country. As a global audience, we did not understand much of the culture at first. So while watching the K-dramas or movies, we would have our phones out and Google things like, did the kids really play the cookie breaking game? Or do people live in the basement apartments? Or for instance, how much is 45.6 billion won in our local currency? Despite the culture difference, the global audience was hooked and mesmerized by what they saw on screen. And finally, coming to the end of the video, what are your views on the ongoing Korean craze? Comment and share your thoughts. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for the next episode.